Welcome back, everyone. We're diving into something really cool today. A classic horror movie poster.
Ooh, classic horror. Always a good time.
Right. This one's for Kiss of the Vampire, 1963 film. You familiar with it?
I am. Yeah, that poster's iconic. The one with the castle, the bats, the vampires, the whole shebang.
Exactly. And it's not just a photo, right? It's like a full-on painted piece, super stylized.
Yeah, it reminds me of, those old, Universal monster movie posters, very much of that era.
So what we're going to do today is, well, we're going to unpack this poster, like really look at it.
Sounds good to me.
The visuals, the symbolism, even how it reflects the whole 1960s vibe. It's more than just advertising, right? It's like a mini history lesson all in one image.
Oh, absolutely. Movie posters, they can tell you a lot about the time they were made.
So, first impressions. What jumped out at you when you see this poster?
Oh, it's definitely screaming horror right off the bat. You got your bats, your castle, that creepy font, dripping blood.
Yeah, that font. It's so classic, isn't it? Like you see that and you instantly know it's going to be spooky.
Totally. It's playing on those genre expectations. It's almost like a visual shorthand for beware scary stuff ahead.
Like it's drawing on our pre-existing knowledge of horror tropes.
Yeah.
We see those things and our brains go, okay, this is a monster movie. Get ready to be scared.
Exactly. And this poster does it so well. It's like super effective at setting that tone immediately.
Okay, but then there's also this interesting thing, right? It's painted, like we said, which feels very classic old school horror.
Hmm.
But then there's a little note at the bottom, Eastman color.
Ooh, yeah, good catch. That's a detail that kind of throws you off, doesn't it?
It does. It's like they're trying to say, hey, this is a vampire story, sure, but it's a modern vampire story. We got color, we got vibrancy.
Exactly. It's like a nod to the advancements in film technology at the time, a shift away from the black and white of classic horror towards something more dot vivid.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that kind of sets the stage for how this poster plays with expectations in other ways, too. Like, take the title, for example, Kiss of the Vampire.
Ooh, yeah, the title's interesting, isn't it?
There's a real tension there, right? The word kiss, it's usually associated with romance, passion, even gentleness.
Right, right.
But then you've got the vampire, a creature of darkness, fear, the undead, not exactly known for gentle kisses.
Definitely not.
Mhm.
So, how do those two ideas coexist? That's where the poster gets really clever. It's playing with our expectations, creating a sense of mystery and suspense.
Like it makes you wonder, what kind of kiss is this? Is it a kiss of death? Or is there a more seductive element at play?
Precisely. It's like Roland Barthes' semiotic theory, right?
Yeah.
Where the poster uses a hermeneutic code to create enigma.
Hold on, hermeneutic code. You got to break that down for me.
Yeah.
Sounds pretty academic.
Sure, sure. Basically, it means the poster is giving us just enough info to pique our interest, but it's leaving a lot unanswered. It's like a visual riddle. It's begging us to decode it, to figure out the whole story.
Ah, so it's intentionally making us curious. It wants us to see the movie to find out what happens with this kiss, and it's using all those classic horror symbols, the bats, the blood, the castle, to kind of amp up the fear factor, too.
Exactly. Barthes called that the symbolic code, using symbols that have culturally shared meanings to evoke specific emotions, in this case, fear and dread, like a visual language we instinctively understand.
Okay, that makes sense. So we've got this poster that's playing with horror conventions, setting a spooky mood and creating a sense of mystery. But there's another layer here that I find really interesting, and that's the way the poster depicts women.
Ooh, yeah, the gender dynamics in this poster are definitely worth unpacking. You've got two very different female figures here.
Right, you've got the woman who seems to be a victim, like she's in distress, and then you have the female vampire who's, well, she's something else entirely.
She's definitely not your typical damsel in distress, that's for sure. She's got this aggressive stance, bared teeth, like she's ready to pounce.
Yeah, and it's interesting, right, because this poster comes out in 1963, a time of major social change. The women's rights movement is gaining traction. Traditional gender roles are being challenged.
Absolutely. It's the dawn of the swinging 60s, a time of upheaval and shifting cultural norms. And you can see those tensions reflected in the poster.
So how do you see those social dynamics playing out in the way these two female characters are portrayed?
Well, on the one hand, you have the classic damsel in distress, which plays into those traditional ideas of women as passive and vulnerable. But then you have the female vampire, who's almost like a co-antagonist. She's powerful, assertive, maybe even calling the shots. It's a fascinating contrast.
It's almost like the poster is reflecting that societal tension, that push and pull between traditional roles and emerging ideas of female empowerment.
Precisely. It's capturing a specific moment in time, a snapshot of these evolving ideas about gender, and the poster becomes a kind of visual representation of that cultural conversation.
This is already making me think about posters in a whole new way. It's not just about advertising a film, it's about reflecting these bigger cultural ideas and anxieties.
That's what makes this poster so compelling. It works on multiple levels. It grabs your attention with those classic horror elements, but then it also invites you to think critically about gender roles and how society was changing at the time.
It's amazing how much can be packed into a single image, right?
Absolutely. And we've only just scratched the surface. There's so much more to unpack here, especially in terms of the visual techniques used to create this impact.
You're right. Let's zoom in a bit and take a closer look at those details.
Let's do it. I'm ready to dissect this visual masterpiece even further.
Okay, so let's get into the nitty-gritty of the visual techniques here. Right off the bat, what strikes me is the color palette. It's so dark and moody, right?
Yeah, lots of blacks, grays, browns. Really sets that eerie tone.
Totally. But then there are these pops of red that just grab your attention, like the bats, the vampire's eyes.
And of course, that dripping blood in the title.
Exactly. It's like those splashes of red are strategically placed to highlight, the danger zones.
It's a classic horror movie trick, right? Using color to guide the viewer's eye and emphasize those key elements of, well, danger and threat.
And it totally works. Like, your eye is just naturally drawn to those red spots. You know something bad's going to go down there.
For sure. It's all about creating a visual hierarchy, making sure the audience focuses on what's important to the story, visually speaking anyway.
And speaking of guiding the viewer's eye, let's talk about the composition. It's like they've set up a stage, right?
Yeah, with the vampires and their victims right in the center, framed by the castle and that creepy moonlit sky.
Totally. It gives it this real sense of depth and like you're peeking into this secret world.
That theatrical framing is so effective at drawing you into the scene. The castle looming large in the background, it adds a sense of scale, And the moonlit sky, it just screams isolation and mystery.
Like you're instantly transported to this whole Gothic world.
Exactly. And then you've got those bats swooping down from the top of the poster, almost like they're connected to the blood dripping from the title.
Yeah, good catch.
It's like a visual link between the title, the kiss, and the bats, which of course are often associated with vampires and, well, spreading their curse.
It's subtle, but it adds to that whole idea of the kiss being dangerous, possibly deadly.
Subtlety is key in good design. And speaking of good design, we got to talk about the typography. That blood-dripping font for the title.
Yeah.
It's so iconic.
I know, right? It's like the quintessential horror movie font. You see that, you're in for a spooky time.
It's that capitalized serif font. It's got that old school, almost Gothic feel. And then that little detail of the blood dripping from the V in Vampire, turning it into a fang. Genius.
It's those little details that really elevate the whole thing. It's not just a font. It's like a visual echo of the vampire's bite.
Exactly. It reinforces the theme visually.
So we've talked about color, composition, typography. But what about the characters themselves, their postures, their expressions? Those tell a story too, right?
Oh, absolutely. Body language is a huge part of visual storytelling, and this poster uses it really well.
Like take the male vampire, for example. He's got his arm around the female victim, but he almost seems stiff, unsure.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? It's not the typical powerful, dominant vampire stance you might expect. There's almost a sense of hesitation there, like he's, wary of something.
And then you have the female vampire. She's the opposite. She's all teeth and claws, like she's ready to strike.
She's definitely the more assertive one in this pairing. It almost makes you wonder who's really in control here.
Right. And we talked earlier about the changing gender roles of the 1960s. Do you think maybe this portrayal of the female vampire could be seen as like a subtle nod to that, like a symbol of female empowerment, maybe?
It's definitely a possibility. She's not the passive victim, that's for sure. But then again, portraying a woman as monstrous could also reinforce some negative stereotypes. It's tricky, right?
It's like the poster is intentionally playing with those different interpretations. It's not giving us a clear-cut answer. It's making us think.
Exactly. And that's what good art should do, right?
Yeah.
Provoke discussion, challenge assumptions.
So we've covered color, composition, typography, even body language. That's a lot to unpack. What's the key takeaway here for our listeners who are trying to analyze posters?
I'd say the most important thing is to remember that every detail matters. Nothing is there by accident. From the colors to the font to the way the characters are positioned, it all contributes to the overall message.
Like learning a whole new language, right?
Yeah.
The language of visual storytelling.
Precisely. And once you start understanding that language, you can really appreciate the artistry behind these posters. You become a more active viewer, not just passively taking it in, but really engaging with the message.
I know I'm definitely seeing posters in a whole new light. Now, I can't help but wonder, what kind of impact did this poster actually have back in '63? Like, how did people react to it?
That's a great question, and one we'll explore in our next segment. We'll dive into the historical context, see how this poster might have been received at the time, and how it continues to resonate with audiences even today.
All right, so we've really gotten into the nuts and bolts of this poster, but now I kind of want to zoom out, think bigger picture.
Yeah, totally. It's important to consider the context, right?
Right. Like, how would audiences back in 1963 have seen this poster? It's a different world then, right?
Oh, absolutely. Remember, this is the early 60s. Think about what was happening: the civil rights movement, the Vietnam War.
Yeah. And the women's rights movement was gaining steam too.
Exactly. It was a time of major social upheaval, and attitudes about gender roles were definitely shifting.
So how do you think people would have reacted to this pretty powerful image of the female vampire? She's not exactly a shrinking violet.
It probably depended on who you asked. For some folks, especially those holding on to more traditional views, she might have been seen as, well, threatening.
Like an embodiment of all those anxieties about women stepping outside their prescribed roles.
Yeah, maybe even a symbol of the dangers of female empowerment. But then, for others, especially those embracing the changing role of women, she might have been seen in a more positive light.
Like a symbol of strength, maybe?
Yeah.
A challenge to the male-dominated status quo?
It's definitely possible. That's what's so cool about this poster, right? It's open to interpretation. It reflects the complexities of the time, those different perspectives on gender that were bubbling up.
And that brings us to the poster's legacy, right? How's it viewed today? Does it still have that same impact?
I think so. I mean, it's still considered a classic. It's a great example of how to use visuals to tell a story, create mood, even spark a little social commentary.
I know I'm never going to look at a movie poster the same way again. It's crazy how much thought and artistry goes into these things.
Right. It's a real craft. These poster designers, they understood how to tap into our shared cultural understanding of symbols and archetypes, how to tell a story without using any words at all.
And in this case, the story they told is one that continues to resonate with people. Even decades later, it's still sparking conversations and making us think.
Exactly. That's the mark of truly great art, right? It
Mhm.
transcends time. It speaks to us across generations.
Well, I think we've done a pretty thorough job of unpacking this poster. We've covered the visuals, the context, the impact. Anything else you want to add before we wrap things up?
Just this. The next time you see a movie poster or any kind of visual media, really, take a closer look. Don't just glance at it. Really see it. Analyze the elements, think about the context, and ask questions.
Great advice. This has been a fascinating deep dive. Thanks for joining me.
My pleasure. Always happy to geek out about a good poster. Until next time, folks, keep exploring and keep asking questions.